All right, welcome back again, everybody. We are officially on the home stretch right now. We have 2 sessions left, very good, compact sessions, and then we're going to have drinks. So isn't that worth the wait? I mean, free booze, more appetizers, all sorts of good stuff, as many Uber drivers as we need to get people home after this so that nobody has to get out of control. So with that, I'd love to actually invite Jamie Pham, who's one of our content marketing consultants, to bring up her 2 guest panelists and start talking to us about how to build an internal publishing practice to leverage that expertise that Catherine discussed this morning. Jamie.
Hi, everyone. There we go. My name's Jamie Pham. As Mike said, I'm a content marketing consultant at LinkedIn. What does that mean? What that means is my job is pretty awesome. I get to go to some of our largest enterprise tech clients, some of them are in the room, and talk to them about their content marketing efforts on LinkedIn. How to get more out of them, how to plan for them, how to strategize around them, how to get their organizations together around a single initiative. But then in addition to that, I get to work with some of our great content partners and train our sales team and speak at conferences. And 5 years at LinkedIn, working through the dredges of selling sponsored in-mail and banners, and now I finally get to do something exciting. So that's my reward. So what I want to talk today about is how to build an internal publishing practice. This morning, Sal Khan did an amazing job of talking about how his organization is changing the way people think about educational content, the way they access it, and the power that it has to change the world, which is pretty inspirational. And as inspired as we all are, I walked away from that presentation feeling like what we do on a day-to-day basis maybe feels a little bit small in comparison. But it doesn't have to, because I think the purpose of him opening this talk today was to point out that the information economy is something that we can all contribute to and something that we can all participate in, we as individuals, but especially corporations and brands. Alex Judkowitz is the founder of Group SGR, which happens to be one of our content partners. And he wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review about corporate enlightenment and how corporations are contributing to the knowledge economy. And basically, brands are no longer peddling products. They are producing, unearthing, and distributing information. And this is a powerful statement. If you think about the size of your organization, how many people you have in your company, if every single one of those people simply took the time to teach what they've learned, you would have so much content you wouldn't even know what to do with it. And some of the companies that I talk to already have that problem. So John and Chad will help talk to us in a few minutes about how they tackle that problem. But there's a real opportunity for us. One of the reasons that I switched into the content marketing consultant role was because when we launched Sponsored Updates, I didn't want to just see a bunch of commercials turned into native ads on LinkedIn, like by any means. I actually wanted to see the quality of content on the platform continue to increase. I wanted to see marketers raising the bar and challenging people to think higher, to think deeper, to think more, to be inspired. So I try to do that with all of my clients that I meet with, and hopefully you guys can walk away with some ideas on how to do that within your organization today as well. So there's been a lot of buzz in the content marketing space around employee activation. And in the beginning, that just meant distribution. And that's a huge challenge to tackle. Catherine, when she spoke earlier, said if you can get your content into the hands of your employees and actually get that out to their social networks, the kind of organic reach that you can get out of that is exponential to probably what you're currently doing. So it's not a bad place to start. But the most sophisticated brands are using their employees or leveraging their employees for more than just content distribution. They're doing it for content creation. Jason Miller talked about big rock content and how you take a big rock piece of content and divvy it up into a bunch of different pieces. And those bunch of different pieces is where your employees can very easily and very scalably contribute to your content strategy through blogs with the LinkedIn publishing platform. Images. One of our partners, Percolate, who's in the room somewhere, where's Chic? They have the Ambassador app, which allows you to distribute content to your employees, but also to enable your employees to take images and submit them for review and enter them into the workflow. This is one that I took at LinkedIn headquarters on 9/11. Every 9/11 we host local first responders for a lunch. And I walked out of an executive meeting and saw Sterling Court filled with fire trucks. And it was pretty awesome, and I was pretty impressed, so I shared it. Curated content. This was an article, best practices on LinkedIn, not written by LinkedIn, but somebody found it and shared it, and somebody else shared it, and that becomes a free piece of content that an employee has unearthed and distributed. This could very easily be filtered into the LinkedIn Marketing Solutions Showcase page and used as part of our always-on content strategy for no cost to us whatsoever. And presentations. How many people in here use SlideShare? Yeah. SlideShare is the dark horse of content, but it's amazing and it's powerful. I mean, if you think about your organization and the content that your employees are already creating, the probability is that a lot of it is living in PowerPoint format. And some of it may not be very pretty, and you may need to hire somebody to make it prettier. Mine are ugly. This is actually a prettier version of the one that I submitted to marketing. Don't judge. But it's content, and it's thought leadership, and it's informational, and some of it might even be worthy of being gated behind a reg form, and you can use SlideShare's Get in Touch button. So these are just some of the ways that you can kind of leverage your employees to help with your content creation. It can be very easy to just kind of turn your employee into a content army. So because I meet with a lot of different companies of many sizes and different geographies, I've kind of broken down the 3 main ways that I see companies leveraging their employees, kind of the programs or how they operationalize these kinds of initiatives. The first is creating employee empowerment programs internally, identifying subject matter experts and training them on how to write. The second is in-house production, and the third is outsourcing writing and production. I found a case study on Sabra, which has a pretty in-depth employee activation program, and they kind of call it the red or the blue pill. Do you want to just participate in a way where you distribute your company's content, or do you want to raise your hand to create content for your company? The second is in-house production. So many companies are hiring writers from Forbes and Wired and Time and CNN to be kind of in-house editorial kind of editor-in-chief or chief of staff, and they're creating in-house production teams themselves. This particular example is a really small company, started here in Menlo Park by a friend of mine, called Exit Round. I think they have maybe 8 employees, but they have kind of a head of content that they've hired from Forbes, because they just think that content is that important. And then outsourcing writing and production. And a couple of our content partners do this for the LinkedIn platform specifically. Group SJR has offered us a couple of packages around ghostwriting, so executive blogging or subject matter expert ghostwriting, so that you can get your employees writing on the LinkedIn publishing platform, even if they're not professional writers. Atlantic Media Strategies also offers that same kind of service, and this is another trend that I'm seeing of content creation houses or traditional publishers starting to get into the corporate publishing space. So that's it, guys. I mean, that's kind of like the bird's eye view. I now want to bring up to stage Chad Warren from Adobe and John Fredette from IBM to answer a whole bunch of questions. Mic check?
Check, check.
Good.
Yep.
So before we begin with my Q&A, and by the way, I'll probably spend maybe 20 minutes in Q&A with these guys, and then I'll open it up to the audience. Adobe and IBM are both very social enterprises, and I'll let these guys introduce themselves and kind of their role within that organization. So you want to start, John?
Sure. Hi, I'm John Fredette, work for IBM Corporation. I'm on the corporate advertising and media team in overall corporate marketing. I manage our global media programs, cross-platform, which is mainly digital these days, which is a great thing, and also activation around our sports portfolio, which is the Masters, US Open Golf, and the 4 tennis Grand Slams. Really great content platforms for us.
Hey guys, my name's Chad Warren. I lead social media globally for Adobe's Digital Marketing Business Unit, and I also am our content marketing practice lead for the company.
Very cool. So I think we have a couple of interesting perspectives here. because Chad is very much in tune with the content creation process and how content kind of makes its way into the calendar and into the funnel, and John is very much in tune with what gets distributed and how it gets measured. So I think we'll find those two themes pretty common amongst the conversation here. But Chad, when we had our call a couple weeks ago before this event, you talked about how your role went from being kind of head of social to head of content, and it was kind of a natural progression. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and where content and social intersect for you today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hate to kind of start with the cliche, but I mean, any good social strategy starts with a content strategy, right? I mean, there's only so far 140 characters can take you, and especially within an enterprise business, we recognize that thought leadership is the probably the largest value that we can bring to our customer base, and so. Looking at that in terms of building a social program for our enterprise business, I came in, looking at this saying, well, we have to build long-form content. We can't rely simply on, recycling what's out in the industry. We can't rely on what we can just put on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, for example. We need to build. We need to build a strong foundation for that. And so what started as I just identifying a key strategic need for the business to be successful, ultimately built into an internal publishing practice. And we had to kind of start from square one and say, the question for us wasn't, how do we create some content, that we can leverage, or how do we go find some stuff? Because we knew that parts of our organization were creating content. The key was to say, how do we systematically create content at scale that's high quality and of value to our audience? And I think that something was said in one of the previous presentations that alluded to kind of the same thing, is anybody can go out there and hire an agency to go create a video or an infographic and do it once or twice or whatever. The more difficult task and the more valuable task in the long term is figuring out how to actually build content at scale.
Got it. So we'll dig into that, I think,
Absolutely.
a little bit more in just a minute. But John, because your role is paid and distribution, which I think is actually almost an afterthought to a lot of content creators right now. Can you talk about how you determine what content gets promoted, or how you determine what gets the budget to be distributed?
Sure, and even in my role, we're not thinking paid first. For us, it's a paid, owned, and earned ecosystem where we are, constantly creating and curating content across the organization. And so, we're looking first to the organic ways of, PR and communications and owned platforms, whether that's, our IBM.com, LinkedIn, social media, to put content out there. Of course, we're another enterprise organization with a ton of content that's on a editorial calendar, which was alluded to earlier, which is an absolute must. So what we do is, first of all, we align to our priorities. So whether the categories are cloud or business analytics, so content's going to get picked according to that. But then according to launches, events, certain things, or real-time trends in the marketplace that we want to take advantage of. So we're going to select that content and then put some paid behind it to help drive the scale. We know from research that putting some paid activity behind pieces of content, especially when timed around a certain event or something, will help drive the engagement. Not just the views, but actual engagement.
And to that end, when you measure the success of your content, what are your main success metrics?
Sure. So, first of all, we're constantly, we won't move away from the traditional brand metrics, favorable selling environment, awareness, and so forth. And we know from research that if we, put impressions in the marketplace and GRPs, our awareness will follow, and that does well for us. So that's not moving away. However, on the digital side, it is all about engagement. And I think everyone does it a little differently. We have our own system, which is based on that, again, looking at paid, owned, and earned, and then exposure, engagement, and amplification. So if you think about paid exposure, it's very straightforward. That's an ad buy. That's a television buy, display, whatever it may be for you. But when you get down to the other side of that, which is earned amplification, that's where your message is getting shared and discussed and brought out to an audience that you weren't initially reaching. And that's a great, halo effect. So what we're doing is we're taking all those data points from all of these places, which is the biggest challenge because it's internal, it's external, it's at your agency, it's elsewhere, and seeing what levers do we have to pull up in the paid and owned side to drive that amplification. And it's a lot of real-time monitoring and trial and error and trying to do it at scale. So that's how we're trying to do it. I think it's we're along the way in the journey, but not fully there yet.
That sounds simple. So Chad, you talked about the need to create content at scale. What role do your employees play in that process?
Our employees play a big role in that process. For those who don't, well, most people in here probably know at least one part of Adobe's business, our Creative Cloud business. The Photoshop. That's the comment I get every time I get on an airplane. It's, oh, you work for Adobe. It's Photoshop. We also have an enterprise side of our business, the Adobe Marketing Cloud, which is it's a cloud product for marketers, right? It's tools for marketers. So we're privileged that we have an internal marketing team. So we have all these subject matter experts on demand generation and email marketing and search and social, et cetera, within our organization that we can tap into. So when we looked at building this program with, quite frankly, very little budget, and not a team of, we don't have a team of staff writers or things like that. We said, how can we do this where it scales, where we're not necessarily farming all this stuff out, that we can tie back this content we create to these internal subject matter experts. So what we did is we said, well, we know that these marketers and people within the organization are already encouraged. We're already encouraging people to do this, but quite frankly, they weren't doing it very often. Or very well. And so what we did is we kind of addressed the time factor. How do we encourage a behavior that they already want to do, but kind of give them back the time? So what we did is we partnered with a vendor that helped provide us essentially a pool of freelance writers. And those freelance writers would act as ghostwriters, and we would partner these writers with our internal subject matter experts. And we would attempt to we built a system by which we could try and find people who could best match the voice of the internal subject matter expert, and that could have an understanding and a grounding. And that, for us, felt like not only a good way to kind of address that time factor and ramp up the production, but also keep a large level of authenticity there, because it's really the thoughts and the subject matter expertise of our internal Adobe employees, and we're really helping to build them as industry leaders by helping them get their expertise out there, rather than just, not that I'm suggesting that there's anything wrong with getting help from an agency or somebody else to create content. We felt like there was more value in having it come internally. And let's just be frank, it's cheaper to do it that way. And so what we do is we identified subject matter experts using some of the same criteria that was presented earlier today, very similar. And we paired those people up, and we essentially managed those folks very similar to where we would like staff writers on an editorial team. And it's been very interesting to watch my team of social media managers who are managing channels like our branded channels move from this role that was like, okay, we manage channels and we moderate our social media channels, to yes, we do that as part of our role, but the bigger part of our role is we kind of act now as kind of section editors. And they're editorial experts now in looking at content pipeline and working with the internal teams and trying to remove barriers to say, hey, how can we get this piece moved and through to production? And that's kind of in a nutshell, kind of how we mobilize that content creation.
Very cool. Sounds great. John, because when you're a marketer trying to talk to marketers, there's an inherent value there, right? Because you kind of already understand their pain points, their mindset, and their lingo and how they speak. IBM has done a really good job of speaking to a variety of different personas by tapping into internal expertise even outside of the marketing department. Can you talk a little bit about who you tap and how you do it?
Sure. For IBM at its core is kind of an intellectual property company. Many people don't know we sell more in services and consulting now than we do in hardware and software. But not that we're moving away from those, but it's still, we're about experts and expertise. We always have been, we always will be. And anyone who's familiar with our Smarter Planet campaign will remember we featured IBMers. That's what I'm working on. I'm an IBMer. And those were authentic IBM people who were experts in their respective fields. So you have to be authentic when you get out there. So, we have practice areas in consulting for healthcare or finance or energy and utilities. And we want to leverage those people and put them out there to make the brand more personable, more approachable, more likely to be engaged with.
Very cool. So you guys both, there's kind of the creation and the writers, and you're talking, Chad, you mentioned, how do we move this along? Like, how many stakeholders are involved in getting a piece conceptualized, created, distributed?
Geez, there's a lot of folks involved. I will say this, but there's a lot of folks involved in creating it. You have folks on my team that, again, are kind of hybrid social media managers, section editors they're kind of overseeing and trying to move the content pipeline forward. We have a primary editor that reviews content as it comes through before it gets moved to one of our branded publications like CMO.com or our digital marketing blog. We have the subject matter experts themselves and the ghostwriter that they partner with. So how many people did I name there? Like 5 or 6 or something like that. And while to me that actually sounds like a lot, it's interesting as I look both around the industry and even in other parts of our business that haven't quite adopted this model yet. It's amazing how many more layers they are. And the work that we did up front to create standards and guidelines and editorial standards to say, this is what meets our criteria, this is going to work, I think has really paved the way to remove this needs to get approved by the director of so-and-so, and then the VP of so-and-so, and then the SVP of so-and-so, and the CMO. It's allowed us to be agile and meet that goal of saying, hey, can we create content at scale? And this year, we're on pace to produce, I think we're on pace to produce about 600 pieces of long-form thought leadership content, and which I'll be honest with everyone, my goal was considerably lower than that for this year, having been a year and a half into it. But I feel like that has been having those editorial standards in place and guidelines written out that we can have somebody who's trained to review things based upon that and have kind of the checks and balances has made a significant difference in getting content out the door, because what we'd find is all too often content gets kind of created or half created and then it just dies on somebody's computer. And that's kind of the biggest shame. And in fact, more and more of our point of emphasis around optimizing the process is say, how do we remove more barriers so we don't have really great content die? Just to give you a quick example, sometimes when we pair our subject matter experts with writers, they get a little hung up because it's like, I don't know, this doesn't sound exactly like me. And everybody kind of feels, some sense of ownership over things. And we want stuff to sound like them. They're the subject matter expert. We want it to reflect their voice. But sometimes we have to kind of work with our subject matter experts to say, look, this is a good piece. It's factually accurate and things like that. Let's move it through and not let the value of this die just because, maybe the wording in one paragraph wasn't quite right or something like that. So.
Yeah. What about for you, John? Do you find that you ever get budget for an initiative and then it's almost like analysis paralysis where you really aren't sure what content to put there? Has that ever happened to you, or you guys pretty much worked through that?
Well, we try to, but it happens all the time. So there'll be a priority, whether it is a strategic objective that we want to support, but maybe the content isn't really aligned to it. I think the content should really come first. You're developing your marketing objectives for the year. Your content strategy should be based on that, and it's not about, okay, let's put together our media or marketing plan and then find what fits within it, because that's setting up for failure.
So I think what struck me about Sal Khan's presentation was when he mentioned that Bill Gates, he discovered that Bill Gates was looking at his videos, and he was like, my videos weren't written for him, they were written for my cousin. I think that for me that was a lesson for all of us, that we shouldn't be writing content for a persona, we should be writing content for a person, and that will make it kind of, authentic, and that's what will kind of resonate with people. Can you each share a success story where a piece of content was inspired and kind of took off in a way that you hadn't anticipated?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we really try and do is keep, I mean, there's some dependencies. Sometimes we'll identify a piece of content that's for a specific use case, right? Like maybe we're going to pitch it to like a Forbes or an HBR or something like that. But a lot of our content tends to take more of an informal tone. And that's the recommendation, and that's the kind of the coaching we're providing, because frankly, it is more authentic and it is more personable, and we want people to kind of, tell stories and things like that, because that's what we relate to, right? It's not a con, right? It's authenticity, and we had one particular piece of content that was one of our product marketing experts in display advertising did a piece and shared some stories within there, and it was just a piece on kind of, a piece, I can't remember the specifics, but it was kind of about where kind of advertising is going and things like that. And we actually received an email because, their bio and their profile, he received an email back from this individual and shared, and the first things that this individual noted was that how kind of inspired they were, and that it was really inspiring to them. And then had, if you're in any enterprise business or any business, the perfect payoff, because it was like, hey, I was really inspired by this, and now I'm really interested in your product. Can I get in contact with a salesperson? And I love to kind of showcase that as our this is the absolute perfect scenario. I'm not suggesting that it happens that way every time, but it was cool how it was like, I was inspired as a marketer. I really felt like I learned something. Now, now here's my credit card, kind of situation. Yeah. And so that was really cool, and it was a really cool showcase for us.
Very cool.
We had an interesting story about authenticity, where we put a lot of effort into a film last year called A Boy and His Atom, which was literally the world's smallest film. And this was a great idea, and the backstory is that we wanted to try and tell some of these stories that no one knows, and we set our agency team, the creatives, loose in IBM Research, kind of knocking on doors and asking people what they're working on. And these are people who don't see the light of day. They're out there, working on stuff for 10, 20, 50 years down the line. And they found these guys who were physically moving atoms, and they're like, this is a great story to tell. And we could have done that in a way which was, a film showing atoms being moved, and that would have been appealing to a scientific audience in a very small set. But it was, in conjunction with our agency team, let's do this creatively and come up with this unique idea. So it was terrific. We got great results. But one thing that we learned, so we did a kind of a cast-off film of meet the researchers behind the work, and just behind the scenes, how they were doing it and so forth. That almost got as many views as the core video, because people loved it. It was personable, it was authentic, it wasn't a high budget, it was like B-roll film, but it was like, wow, we should really take a step back when you look at this work and plan it to get that type of content.
Showcasing human beings in
Absolutely.
a social campaign. Shocking. Glad that worked for you guys. And then I think my final question that I want to open up to the audience, because I think over lunch I was already starting to get a lot of interest in this topic, but I met with a company not represented here, not a tech company, last week that said that they are producing about 30 pieces of content per week, but they're not promoting it or distributing it, right? They don't call themselves content marketers because they're not there yet. They're just content creators. I also get the question a lot, what percentage of my budget should go towards content creation versus distribution? How do you guys approach the prioritization of time and budget on content creation versus distribution? It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a huge question, and in my mind they go hand in hand. I mean, the thing that I like to talk about internally is, it's more of a figure of speech than anything else, but I like to argue that distribution is the reason why BuzzFeed is kicking New York Times trash in digital. Now, no one would argue, no offense, BuzzFeed, New York Times, no offense to either of you. No one would argue that BuzzFeed has better content than New York Times. But, when New York Times writes a 78-page manifesto about how they're not doing, which was really the crux of it if you read it, was how they're not doing distribution very well, how they're not making good use of their content and getting it into the hands of all the right people.
And the fact that someone else is taking New York Times content and getting more scale and distribution than they were. I mean, that's just shocking.
I think that proves the point right there, is that, again, nobody's going to really argue that they have the best content in the world, but they've figured out how to get it into the hands of as many of the right people as possible. And so if you make one of those two an afterthought, you're in big trouble. And you're if you make creation, the primary thing, and distribution the afterthought, you are squandering the value of that content. And if you focus all on distribution, then you have kind of no weight to the content, or you have too little content to work with, right? So I think you have to, at risk of saying do everything, you gotta really commit to both.
Sure. It's definitely a balance. I know from our perspective, our paid media budgets are on the decline. However, that's an active decision because we're creating more content. Our production budgets are going up because we're creating more content, and our bet is that the engagement and the scale and the sharing is going to bridge that delta and even exceed it more so.
Very interesting. Cool. Well, I have a lot more questions. I mean, we could be up here for a long time because I find this stuff very fascinating, but I want to go ahead and open it up to people in the audience that might have questions about their programs or their roles or stuff that we've talked about.
Hi, I have a comment and a question, John. I saw the boy and his atom. It's excellent. Chad, I was wondering, what defines your content and social team? How many members and what do they do?
Well, my team right now is I have a team of, internally I have a team of 5 people. And those people's primary roles is they're what we call like segment or solution leads. So they represent the different, we have the nice benefit of the fact that that Adobe's Marketing Cloud solution set actually tends to align with industry verticals. So, like our Adobe Analytics product aligns with analytics professionals, our Adobe Social product aligns with social media professionals, and so I have a vertical lead for each one of those product sets, and which works out nicely because then I don't have to struggle like, well, do we line around products, and quite frankly, we should be aligning around audiences and verticals. And like I said, their responsibilities are, they're ultimately responsible for how do I create value? How do I create value with earned media in behalf of this audience segment or this product or solution? And so what that means today with so much of the emphasis on content and content marketing is, okay, how do we leverage our social media channels as both, there is a community element there, but primarily as a distribution mechanism to get this content in the hands of all the right people. And then how do they drive the content pipeline, content that is creating value and that further kind of influences and moves people through the customer journey. So I have 5 people on my team. It's not a huge team. But then outside of that, I have a program manager that supports our content marketing program, and then we have, like I said, we have some external resources through like these ghostwriters and an external editor that we leverage for those purposes.
A quick question on how do you guys take the requirements from the business and hand it over to the individuals that are supporting these verticals or these industries?
That is a very tough thing, and in fact, it's really only been in the last 6 months or so that we've really formalized that in a very kind of systematic and process-oriented way. Because the reality is this program, our publishing practice is only just under like 2 years old. And the initial challenge we wanted to solve for was, can we create content at scale? And then we got to scale, and then everybody's saying like, well, how do we better align this with the business priorities, which we knew that we were doing, but it's how do we get that much tighter and have a very, very specific tie to those things. So what we've done is we've created 2 concepts. One is we have, like probably several companies here have them, as editorial boards, where the business units are responsible for bringing forward like, okay, here's the messaging, here's our go-to-market, here's the things that are important to us and the themes that are critical for our business. And then we're taking those things and we're taking those briefs, if you will, and then rolling those into what we call story briefs. So we basically will create kind of, if you will, like abstracts or even kind of headlines around these are the kind of the stories that we want to be telling. And then what we've done with that infrastructure is we've gone from a system where everybody's kind of have their micro priorities to, okay, here's the priorities and here's kind of the stories we need to tell. And what it's done is we were concerned that, my goodness, when we implement this piece, that we're going to kill the productivity of these employees because they probably feel more empowered to write about what they want to write about. Write about, I'm interested in writing about Pinterest this week. Why, right? Well, what we found is that even the subject matter experts are yearning for, what should I be writing about? And most of them, when they're subject matter experts, they have a strong POV. So they can take one of our story briefs kind of off the shelf and be like, and go on for 30 minutes an hour, and we can roll that into a rich piece of long form content. And what we found is without kind of setting these kind of hard mandates or laying down the gauntlet like, no, you have to create stories about this and you have to create content about this. We've kind of teed it up for people and let 1,000 flowers bloom, and it's worked very, very well.
I think the challenge is there's the content you can control and there's the content you can't. And from our point of view, there's over 300,000 employees. You can't control all of that. But we're doing, there's enablement, there's training. Everyone's up to date on social media. But we're taking like these thought leaders that we were talking about earlier, probably 250 people from around the world, and we're taking them deeper. Better training, better resources, better amplification of their messaging, so we know that as leaders in their respective areas, they're going to have a higher propensity to put out quality content.
John makes an excellent point. Is what I didn't mention is that like I said, we're not forcing them to say like, oh, here's the approved list of stories you have to tell this quarter. People, our subject matter experts still have the ability to create. And I think by not kind of squashing that and not putting these too hard of limits and defined limits around, well, what you're going to create, I think it's frankly an interesting exercise in human psychology. what kind of drives people, but at the end of the day, it's and I like to think of it as kind of like there's. I hate to pull out stories from the old high school, but I remember I was an AV nerd. And and we had like the school television thing. I don't come from a publisher, but there was the stories that needed to be told and that somebody needed to cover, and then the rest of it was okay. Come pitch a story idea, and and everything ultimately got filled through using that model, and because we don't, these people don't get paid to write, right, or produce. We have to kind of take a little bit different approach to getting content out of these folks.
I would say one thing that LinkedIn has done well from my perspective, when we first opened up the publishing platform, employees were given early access, and we have social media guidelines that are very simple and very reasonable. And there is a great deal of inherent trust in not over-prescribing your policy. You have to trust that your employees are professionals and that they're adults, and that if you give them some very general guidelines about how to get things approved that need to be approved and let them go on to do the rest, that there's actually a great deal of power in that. And what we have found is the quality and the quantity of the writing in just giving people free rein to do that with a limited number of guidelines has been really powerful. Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think you kind of just addressed this, but I'll ask it a different way. Kind of what % of your effort is spent on propagating and building brands for these internal luminaries and thought leaders and sort of helping them be successful as individuals to promote your brand versus just say of your 600 big content pieces that you did are just kind of churned out by the company and not ascribed to any particular person, writer?
Well, so almost, I would say that a very, very high percentage are attached to an individual. And right now, just to kind of clarify, most of the content creation we're doing at scale within our internal practice is kind of long form, like article type content. And the reason why is I actually see that as a great foundation for kind of the big rock stuff. because you can have so many offshoots of that and you can create so many different things off of that. And so because of the nature of that, like it's like an article, most of that has, somebody has a byline attached to it. But what we see as the nice benefit of that is that we're helping these individuals basically build their profile as an industry luminary. But these people they're Adobe employees. They work for Adobe. And we believe that, and a lot of their content is being published on Adobe's branded publications. In addition to that, we partner with our PR team to take some of this content, specifically the article content, and pitch it to third-party sources, like Forbes or HBR or Marketing Land or Clicksy or whatever it is. And we're also putting a lot of stuff on the LinkedIn publishing platform. And so there's kind of this dual benefit, right? Because individuals get the benefit of saying like, okay, I'm out there in the industry and I'm building a name for myself. And then the company benefits because these are Adobe's thought leaders, right? Now, obviously, if somebody leaves, that's too bad. But I think that's just kind of part of the deal. It's part of how it works, and I think we're comfortable with that. I was kind of curious how you guys do that.
It's very similar. It's the ecosystem. I mean, there is the empowering our employees, especially the thought leaders, and to be successful because they are representatives of the brand. And for them to have a good voice out there, for them to be putting out quality content, whether we directly manage it or not, is a benefit to us. Then separately from that, we are constantly creating videos and infographics and other pieces of long form content that we're putting out in a more measured manner. But it's not one independent of another. It's all working together.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
I'm back again. Hi. You're both producing a lot of content. Chad, you have 600 pieces. I'm sure at IBM you have quite a few pieces of content. Do you have a stop-gate process, an editor that reviews everything, and a creative process around that? Because that's a lot of pieces that have to go out and get branded. And then who takes a look at it and says, this is quality, this is going out, this is not?
We let a lot of that function through both. We have a primary editor that's really responsible more for reviewing things against kind of general brand guidelines and content guidelines, and then we have these section editors that they act as more of kind of the qualitative folks involved, and it's less about saying, well, whoa, stop, slow down. I think we kind of manage that more at a macro level, where we're saying, like, okay, let's focus more on quality, and let's build in some more things to kind of focus more on quality. Because like I said, we actually scaled more this year than I thought that we would. So we're actually getting into the nice problem to have, where it's like, wow, we have a lot of content. That being said, we also have a number of branded publications that reach a handful of different audiences. We also have good relationships with third-party media where we can pitch stories to third-party, and there's other ways to kind of use and reuse content in different ways. And so I don't think, while I think your point is well taken, where we're looking at now more in this place where, okay, we've figured out how to scale this in a way and be really agile in creating this. We need to build in more ways to kind of have more checks and balances around, what's really high quality and how do we want to leverage these different pieces. But at the same time, I don't know if, as long as the data continues to show us that this content is performing and our overall engagement and the overall results from the content continue to go up, it's kind of hard to say like, oh, too much, we better pull it back, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah, we don't have like a set quantity or limitation. I go back to the content you can control versus not, and we put it in different buckets. There's the externally produced content that may appear in your advertising. It's it has to look like your brand, sound like your brand, be authentic, and fit the mold. Then there's the blogs and other content that has to meet your brand standards to some degree, but doesn't have to be professionally produced and expensive to do.
I think it's a good point. I think a lot of traditional marketers or content organizations are trying to exercise too much control and really holding up the creative process or even the production process.
And resources are such an issue. So external resources are certainly a challenge. You can't have your agency teams develop everything. That's why we're building internal publishing practices. But then internally, that's a challenge as well, because we're going to these thought leaders and experts and again and again and again, we need your help. Even we're giving them ghostwriters, we're giving them resources, it's still a draw on their time. And their best time is when they're in front of a customer helping to close a deal or doing something like that. So something we struggle with it.
But to Chad's point, once they get in front of a customer, if they have this kind of authority or expertise behind them because their content is good and has gotten engagement and distribution, that brings an additional layer of validity to the conversation, right?
Absolutely.
So I think it's symbiotic.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the last one. Cool. Great. Thank you.
All right.